Hi, it is really an honor to be here. I feel kind of dumb speaking to other pastors. I feel like I don't really know what I'm doing yet, much less how to tell other people what to do. But it's really great to be here. Honestly, I am here not to teach, but to learn from Chris and from all of you. And it's great to meet some of you that I have heard about from others, from Phil and Chris and Darren and others. And it's really just such a joy and honor to be with you. I had an email that said I have an hour, and then I had a text that said I had 40 minutes, and now I have 23. So,
Take 40.
but we're on South African time, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of mean whatever, as long as I want? You're charismatic. Let's just talk for as long as I want, all right? So Chris asked me to talk about mission. And in all honesty, with great respect for Chris, my first thought was seriously, really, no. And in part because I don't really know what I have to say that you don't already know. I assume that as a pastor, as a church leader, you're a reader, you're a thinker, you're around, you're in that conversation which has been done and maybe even overdone over the last 5 or 10 years. So I thought rather all I would do is basically tell a little bit of autobiography, a little bit of my story and the church family that I come out of, and then tell just a couple of things that we have come to believe along the way, which I'm sure for a ton of you is review, and if I bore you, I apologize in advance. But I'll just tell a little bit of my story, and we'll talk about some of that stuff along the way. Sound good? Yeah, just Holy Spirit, one more time. We just invite you and need you, even in a short time. I don't want to waste anybody's oxygen on planet Earth. And so I just pray, would you come right now, and would you press deep into the heart, and sometimes it's what's said, and other times it's what is unspoken, God. And even this last hour, just getting to watch Chris and Dana serve you together was just, I think, why I'm here. And so I just thank you for that, and just invite you to come now and do what you do best. Amen. Okay, so my story in a nutshell, I was on a team that planted a church. I was 23 when we started, so I just had all sorts of wisdom and knowledge at the time. And I co-planted this church with my dad, and I actually was an embedded church planter from day one. The plan was 2 years in, I would go off and plant a church, and that was 12 years ago. So you see how that plan goes. But we plant this church, and my dad was the lead, and I was the second. And it was kind of, I was living in the city, in the urban core of Portland, and it was out on the west side, right out into the suburbs. And it grew really fast. So we grew by about, 800 or 900 people a year for 7 years straight. And I say that, I don't normally ever talk about that. I say that not to brag. If anything, that's an embarrassment now in hindsight. But it grew really fast. And so that's an interesting dynamic, in particular when you're young, and that's like what you think church planting is like. That's your view. That does some really screwed up things to you. You're like, man, we didn't grow by 1,000 people this year. Where is God? You know? So clearly it does. I'm in therapy now, and it's there's years left. So we grew really fast, and a couple of years in, I became the teaching pastor and did the bulk of the teaching. And then my dad and I started to switch roles, and I became the lead pastor. We planted a second location, then a third. And I woke up one day, and I was 30 years old, and I was leading a really big church that had 3 sites and 90-something staff, and you would think I would be on top of the world, but in hindsight, I started to have serious doubts about the kind of church that had grown up around my leadership. And when you start that young, the downside, not to disagree with what Chris said, but the downside to starting young is you don't really know what the crap you believe yet, or maybe that's just me. You have passion, but you don't have a lot of wisdom. And so I had a lot of passion, but I didn't really have, I think, a thought-through vision of what church is and what it could and what it should be. And so I started to discover that along the way. And when you have a whole bunch of people following you around as you discover that, it's a bit dangerous. So, I woke up, I'm 30, and I started to realize, man, I'm not even sure if this is Jesus, how Jesus would do church. And part of that was I was exposed to this ongoing conversation around the mission of God. So I started to read, and I was in particular influenced by a lot of the British writers, Chris Wright from Northern Ireland, N.T. Wright, of course, it's like Jesus, Paul, N.T. Wright, or Dallas Willard, one of the two. And Leslie Newbegin, of course, was huge. Richard Bauckham here in the States, Scott McKnight, Gary Bashir's in Portland. Started to read and to think, and I'd grown up in the church, but ironically, I feel like even though I'd grown up in Bible teaching churches my entire life, I actually had no clue what the Bible was about, no idea of kind of the narrative arc of the Bible from beginning to end. And I was exposed in particular to The Mission of God, Unlocking the Grand Narrative of Scripture by Chris Wright. If you've read that, it is 800 pages that is well worth your time. There's just a couple books that I feel like every pastor on the planet, every church leader needs to work through, and that's one. I'm not sure, maybe you would know, Chris. I think Chris Wright is the one who coined the phrase mission of God. Yeah, or at least made it popular. And that is language I personally like less and less because I think it sounds corporate or maybe even militaristic. But it's an idea that I like more and more. And so I was really shaped by that book. When people ask you, are you Reformed? Are you dispensational? I'm like, I'm Chris Wright, whatever that is, that book. That's what I believe. And so from his writings and a number of others, I think a couple of big ideas that became clear to me. So I'll just start off with this, and most of you already know this. But when I talk about mission, this is what I mean. So 3 big ideas. First is that God is a missionary God. So mission starts not as a command for something that you and I are to go do, but it starts with who God is. It flows out of the nature of God's being, whether it's Genesis 1 and you have let us create mankind in our image. You have this Father, Son, Holy Spirit dynamic we learn later from Jesus, and out of that communal, creative, generous love spills planet Earth and the cosmos and humanity. And then in Genesis, as everything goes awry, you have this God who goes after Adam and Eve. And then in Genesis 12, that God goes after humanity once again through his kind of do-over project with Abraham and then Israel, and this God that goes after humanity through Jesus. And of course, the paradigm of the Father sends the Son, and the Son sends the Spirit, and the Spirit sends the church. So God is a missionary God. That's who God is by nature. So the starting place for the conversation is not how do we get more people saved in a secular pluralistic context. The context is who is God, and how do we image and mirror and walk out the likeness of what God is like. I love that line from Chris Wright. Mission is participation in the life of God. It's the best definition I've ever heard of what mission is. So mission is when we participate in who God is and what he's up to in the world. Second big idea for me was that the mission of God is to bring healing and renewal to all of the creation. So you all know this, but the Bible is a story that is an obvious and axiomatic truth that I grew up with the Bible my entire life. I started reading through the Bible in a year when I was, 7. Like I had a dad like Chris who's like, you will walk with Jesus or you're done, So I grew up around the Bible, but frankly, I had no clue what the Bible was really about until at least 25 or 26 years old. It was news. Hopefully your story is much better than mine. But I think one of the things that's easy to lose sight of, and what I still think, even though it's been popularized at a pastor and church leader level, I still think most people in the average church in the U.S., and I have no clue about internationally in South Africa or whatever, but in the U.S., don't really get that the Bible is telling one overarching story. And it's easy to lose sight of that because there's dozens of authors and genre, and it's complex, and anybody who talks about how clear the scripture is, I'm like, what Bible are you reading? It's beautiful, and it's not clear. It's complex. It's drawn out. It's written all sorts of languages and culture and so on and so forth, and it's easy to lose sight. Now, these scripture writers are all together telling one ongoing, creative, beautiful story about God and what he's up to in the world. And basically what that story is about is the mission of God. So when I talk about the mission of God, I also mean the story of the Bible. So to me, the story of the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, is what I mean by the mission of God. And in one of my opinions right now, one of the main problems we have at the church in the U.S., the reason that we're in a crisis of biblical authority, sexuality is the pertinent example right now, the rethinking of sexuality. But ultimately, that is a conversation about the Bible. And frankly, I can't believe this crisis did not come 30, 40, 50 years ago, because the theological liberal response to the Bible right now is not a critique of good theology. It is a critique of what's now being called biblicism, which is a very evangelical American way of reading the Bible that claims to have a high view of the Bible. In my opinion, actually does not have a high view of the Bible. And it's this idea of, the Bible is timeless truth or whatever it is. It's the owner's manual for life or whatever. And it's just not a tenable way to read the Bible. It doesn't make sense of what the Bible actually is. And so we have to recapture, and we have to help our people recapture this idea that the Bible is story. It's not just story, but it is first and foremost a story. And my point, what I'm getting to, is that the end of the story, if you know the end, as I just finished Isaiah this morning, so Isaiah speaks of it in the future, and as does Revelation 21 and 22, the end is not a bunch of souls in heaven singing Amazing Grace for millennia on end. That sounds more like the other place to me. But the end is a city with walls and art and architecture and culture and humanity. It's here, it's on earth, and it's a renewal and a healing of the cosmos at a universal level, and of city and of culture and of humanity and of gender and of food and of drink and of everything. And I just think that's so important. And what that means is that all sorts of things fall under the rubric of mission, not just evangelism. And evangelism, I do think, is first and foremost. But all sorts of things, from work and vocation and medicine and the arts and science and technology and social justice and government and creation care, all sorts of things fall under the rubric of the mission of God. I think two of the epochal moments in the story of God are the cultural mandate. So Genesis 1, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the earth. That is basically the charter for humanity, and it's a charter it's a command to make culture. I think it's a command that still stands. And then you have Jesus, the other epochal moment, in Matthew 28, what's now called the Great Commission. Of course, there's a Great Commission of sorts in all four Gospels. But Matthew 28 is the famous one, go and make disciples. And a number of scholars have made the point that's Jesus rephrasing the cultural mandate in light of the story of God, everything that's gone down, Adam and Eve and sin and human rebellion and Israel and all of that. He's saying, keep that up, but now we have to also make disciples, because these image bearers that were made to rule over the earth have become not only disconnected from God, but actually in rebellion to God, and so we've made a muck of the earth. So human beings have to come back into relationship with God so they can do what they were supposed to do all along and make culture and turn a garden into a city, which is the whole meta-narrative of Scripture. So I think that both of these callings still stand. And I do think that the call to make disciples is preeminent, but that does not negate or cancel out the original call to make culture, to make something of the world. All that to say, when we talk about mission, I think we need to cast a wider net than evangelism or church planting. Great stuff, and I'm fine to say that's at the top of the list, but we need to cast a net that is as wide as creation itself. And then the third big idea for me around mission is that the way God wants to bring healing and renewal to all creation is through a missionary people. So God's a missionary God. The mission of God is the healing and renewal of all creation, and the way God wants to bring healing and renewal to all creation is through a missionary people. So we see this at least as early as Genesis 12, what Paul in Galatians called the gospel in advance, this idea where God speaks over Abraham as the founder of Israel and says, I will bless you, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, and through you all peoples on earth will be blessed. And so this is just this idea of God's people as a conduit, as a medium, as an agent of God's healing and renewal in the world. And so I think we have to think that way about Israel, the sons and daughters of Abraham. Israel was always a means to an end. The point of Israel was never Israel, and that's what Israel lost sight of. And the prophets had to keep coming back and saying, listen, God bless you, but this is not about you. I just finished Isaiah. There's so much in Isaiah about, listen, this doesn't end with you being racist, ethnocentric, nationalists in Jerusalem. This ends with no walls and people from all over the world here in Jerusalem and priests and Levites who aren't Jewish. That's how the story ends. But we forget that, we laugh at that, but I think we're no different today. The same, fast forward to the church. The point of the church is not the church. We are a means to an end. You've all heard that phrase. It's not that the church has a mission, it's that the mission has a church, right? And that's a little bit of a slogan, but there's so much truth in that, right? And we have to, this is what Israel lost sight of, and frankly, it's what I think the American church for sure has lost sight of. We think that we are an end. The end is not my church or yours. We are a means to what God is up to in the world. So, I think the call for the church is to join with and participate in this mission that is cosmic in scope, what God is up to in the world. I think there are three primary ways that we call our people to participate in the mission of God. And this maybe is helpful for you. It is for me. Kind of think about three broad overarching categories. One is disciple making, or if you want to call that evangelism, whatever. I think disciple making is a little bit more New Testament-ish of language, but calling people to follow Jesus. The second one is work, what we do to actually make culture, to take the raw materials of planet Earth and as an act of worship to God and service to our fellow man, turn it into a latte or a building or a bridge or a sermon or a counseling session or a meal or a child or whatever it is that we do for work. That is a huge way and something that we need to recapture in the church, the place and value of work, which is how most people spend most of their life. And one of the mistakes I think we make as pastors is we spend the majority of our times teaching people how to live the minority of their lives. Yeah. And so we talk a lot about, prayer and Jesus and God, and it's all fantastic stuff, but we don't really talk about how to honor Jesus as an accountant, or honor Jesus as a mom, or honor Jesus as a graphic designer, or honor and worship and serve and participate in the mission of God as a barista, which clearly is to the glory of God. Whatever. So disciple making, second work, and then third is justice, as we join with God's heart for the poor and those on the margin of society. And all of your churches, I would assume, are doing amazing things. In our city, we're really involved in the foster care system and also in refugee care. Portland's a hub for refugees being deposited, so we have all these families that show up, literally have a plastic bag, 11 children from somewhere, usually in Syria, Iraq, don't speak English, and are put into a ghetto apartment in a bad part of town and given 6 months of provision to live off of. And so our church is there to help them and love them. And so stuff like that that's so beautiful. So disciple-making work and justice. And I think once again in the church it's easy to make the focus on disciple-making. And that's not bad, but we need to also remember the place and value of work and justice in the mission of God. So back to my story a little bit. So that was, I think, old news for a lot of you. But for me, this was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. That was honestly brand new information for me. That was not the worldview that I grew up in. And once again, I grew up in good Jesus, Bible teaching churches, amazing family, all of that. But that was all brand new information for me. And it really ended up kind of messing with my view of church, because I started to have this just huge, just magnificent, beautiful vision of the mission of God and what Jesus called the kingdom of God and how broad and wide and beautiful and holistic it is. And then I started to look at my church, and I saw just a whole bunch of people in a room singing a couple of songs, listening to one person talk at them for 45 minutes, some cool prayer, maybe some justice stuff, and then it was goodbye, go have a good individualistic, private Jesus life. And I started to realize, man, how does the form of church that I'm involved in line up with the mission of God? And so we started to, join what sounds like most of you are part of, this larger vein of the church that is now called the Missional Church, which is just horrific, terrible, cheesy, churchy language, but whatever, we're stuck with it. So, and I think the backstory, most of you know this, but the backstory is, Leslie Newbigin, who in 1936, British missionary, left for India, was there until the 70s, and the dude, after 40 years, he and his wife took buses with 2 suitcases back from India to England. That's just, come on, that's old school. We don't do it that way anymore. Maybe South Africans do, but Americans don't. There's no, Chemex pour over on the way on the bus. I would never survive. So he comes back, and he was the first one to point out the obvious, that Europe, in his context, had changed in that 40 years as a result, in particular, of World War II and the secularization that was born out of that war in Europe. And Europe had changed. We were now living in a post-Christian, secular, pluralistic society, but the church had not changed. The church was doing business as usual and was shrinking and dying. And he was the first one to kind of call the church to that wake-up reality and to make the point that you do church very differently in a quote-unquote Christian or Christianized culture. There's no such thing as a Christian culture, but a Christianized culture than you do in a post-Christian or not, or a city like Portland. I'm sure some of you, in Dubai or wherever, we're not post-Christian. We never were Christian in the first place. So in a thoroughly secular or pluralistic society or whatever, you have to change how you do church. And he made the point that if we don't change how we do church, all we will do is manage decline over the next 50 years. And I really believe that's true. And I think we have to change how we do church as a general rule, or we'll wake up, our grandkids will wake up with, and we'll be France, basically. No offense if you're French. But you're not exactly known for a thriving, kingdom of God movement. And I think, I think here's the danger, and this is, I think, an acute danger for you. If you are a church planter and your church is going even halfway well, or if you are leading a healthy, thriving church, I think you get a skewed perspective on what's actually happening in America. And I think it looks a lot better than it really is. Because you have this church plant, and you started, and all these people are come, and whether it's 50 people or 500 people or whatever, people are there, and they're excited, and they're happy, and they're following Jesus, and we just baptized, so X amount of people on Sunday. And that's fantastic. But I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that what you are experiencing is the exception to the rule. That across the board, at least in the U.S., the church is not growing and thriving. Most of our church plants, and I say that not to criticize you, but myself, is transfer growth. So I had a church that grew by thousands and thousands of people in a couple of years. It was not Acts chapter 2 all over again. It was mostly people who thought we had better teaching or whatever, or were, moved by the Spirit to join the church or whatever, code for you have lots of hot young single women here and I want to get married or whatever it is, So, let's be honest, you know what I mean? We maybe had 25% of our church that came to faith in Jesus and was baptized for the first time. Maybe a bit more generous than that. But upwards of 75% were from another church. Hopefully your percentage is much better than that. But that's fairly common, In fact, sometimes it's a lot worse than that. And so it's easy to lose sight, like, our church grew by thousands of people. Yeah, but the church in our city shrank in the same amount of time. And so what happens is if you're in a church plant and it's growing, or you're in a healthy, thriving church, that's not a bad thing. Celebrate that. Thank God for that. But I think it's easy to, be overly optimistic and even to think, we're doing awesome. The church is growing. Your church is growing. And half of your church is growing with other churches that are shrinking. And that's not to rebuke anybody. There's a health to that. I'm not a traditionalist, so I think there's a give and a take. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Look at you. Led by the Spirit. That's what I want a charismatic in the front row always. Thank you. So, all that to say, we basically said, all right, we have to change, And for us, I'm almost already at that time, but we had to make 4 kind of overarching changes. A lot of you never had to make these changes because you started with a much better ecclesiology or vision of church than we did. Our 4 changes that we had to make when we started about 5 years ago were the big one, obviously, in generic language, is from attractional to missional. So that language is played with a lot, and people have, different feelings around that word attractional. Some people like it, some people hate it. I would define an attractional church this way. So this is what I mean by an attractional church. 3 things. It's Sunday-centric. So it's all, when you talk about your church, you talk about the 2-hour experience on Sunday. Even if it's about the community that happens there, or the pour-over coffee and the conversations or whatever. It's about Sunday. Secondly, it's personality-driven, whether that's a celebrityism thing, or it's the cool vibe, or it's lots of single people, or lots of artists, or whatever it is. It's personality-driven. And third is consumer-oriented programming. So, we would never call it consumer-oriented programming. We would call it like a young moms group or a singles group. Here's a bunch of, Instagram hipster, good-looking white single people. Let's put you all together, and so you can grow in Jesus together or whatever. And so we package it and, I don't mean to be cynical, but that's like attracts like. And so we want to be around people. So I meet Grant this morning. I'm like, dude, I like you. I don't know Grant. He's just wearing a black T-shirt and jeans, and he sounds cool because he's South African, and he's got cool sunglasses. So he's like me. I like him. He reminds me of me. I'm like, that's why I like you so much, So we couch that as, we want to help you grow in Jesus. We couch it in all sorts of spiritual language, and it's not all bad. There is a time and a place for, age-specific or demographic-specific stuff. But consumer-oriented programming is a huge part of how we do church. Now, I just want to note that these 3 things, Sunday-centric, personality-driven, consumer-oriented programming, this is not about size. So this can be done in a megachurch with 20,000 people or in a church plant with 75. And I think a lot of times small church planters or church leaders think, well, we're not like that because we only have 50 people. But it's still Sunday-centric, it's still personality-driven, and it's still consumer-oriented programming. It's just small and community-based and whatever. But it's the exact same form of church. It's just way smaller. This can be done if your church is like, suburban, soccer mom, 90s, Lord, I lift your name on high. Like if that's your thing, which nothing's wrong with that. Nothing's wrong with that, Dana. Go for it. It's great. Or if you're like, the hip, neo-Anglican, liturgical, cerebral, like, thing, which is huge down here, right? In Southern California, it's a big thing. It's all ex-megachurch people, so that's great. So sorry if that's you. There's a need for that. But let's be honest, it's all like sons of megachurch pastors. So it can be done. My point is, regardless of the style of your church or the size of your church, I'm not dealing with that. I'm dealing with the form, the structure of your church. So that's what I mean by an attractional church. Now, a missional church, here's how I would define it, is one that has recaptured the mission of God or the story of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, come to realize that it's the healing and the renewal of everything that God created and called good all those years ago. And as a result, has come to realize, those three big ideas: God's a missionary God, healing, renewal. He wants to bring it about through missionary people. And as a result, is trying to do three things. And this is what we have been trying to do the last 5 years. One is to define church as a community, not as an event. So, and this is less important, I think, if your church is smaller, but the larger your church gets, the more important this becomes, in my opinion. And so for us, we're not a huge church anymore, but we're big enough that we have to say over and over and over. I said it Sunday at our basics, like our Welcome to the Church class. We say it over and over and over again. For us, we do missional community, whatever your form is. Your missional community is your primary experience and expression of church. And Sunday is very important, but it is secondary. And if you have to pick between one, pick community over the event on Sunday, right? And that's not because we don't have a high view of what happens on Sunday. We do. I'm a teacher. That's my passion. But still, we believe that community is like the driving force. Church is community. So our dream is that when if you were to meet somebody from Bridgetown Church and say, hey, tell me about your church, our dream is not that they would say, oh, we have this sweet Instagram account. It's so awesome. And Sundays at this beautiful old historic building in the west end of downtown. 5 years ago when we started, it wasn't cool. Now it's a super cool part of town, like where it's everything, So that's not our dream. Our dream is that people would say, well, there's these 15 people. We have dinner together every Wednesday night. We all live in the same neighborhood, but we see each other all the time. We do life together, and we've really come together, and we mentor kids at risk for foster care through our local elementary school. And we just want to be present for Jesus in the kingdom of God. So we just throw a lot of parties. We have a lot of people that don't know Jesus into our home, and we're just trying to help each other practice the way of Jesus, and we really want to become more like Jesus over our time together. Oh yeah, and then on Sunday nights, there's this thing at this church downtown that we go to. So that's our dream, And so for us, that shift, to define church as a community, not as an event. Secondly, to put the church back in the hands of the people. In an event-based church or an attractional church, everything is done by the paid professionals for the most part, so the pastor and the staff, the larger the church gets. And your job as a non-staff member is to volunteer, tithe, and invite your friends to church. And those are all great things. We ask our people to volunteer, tithe, and invite their friends to church. But I think our people, as a general rule, have more capacity than that. And I think often we have you're called to be a worship leader, a teacher, a church planter, an elder, or you can pass out a weekly at the front door. There's got to be some middle ground in there. You know what I mean? And people are like, this is your ministry. It's not your ministry. Nobody has the spiritual gift of ushering. You know what I mean? That's just serving. You know what I mean? So when I'm with my family, somebody has to clean the dishes. You do that because it's your family, not because it's your ministry. You know what I mean? So and I know the heart behind that is good, but in an attractional event-based church, if you're not the pastor or worship leader, basically your job is to help put on the event. And so I think we have to get away from that. In a missional church, I just think in a healthy church, Ephesians 4:11 and 12 is the paradigm. The role of church leaders is, in the language of Ephesians, to equip, or whatever language you prefer, to serve and help people do what God has called them to do. So instead of like, hey, here's our thing, come and help us do our thing, this is such a cheesy analogy, but it's the best one I've heard. It's the Home Depot model of church. So anybody know Home Depot's horrible, but anybody know Home Depot's, tagline? You can do it, we can help. So you come to Home Depot and you have a project, like you need to remodel your bathroom, or you need to plant a lawn, or like whatever your thing is, and in theory, there's an expert there to help you, which never, in reality, you wander the aisles for 20 minutes and like a high school kid who makes $7 an hour is like, oh, I don't know. Like, that's not helpful. But in theory, there's an expert there, and you go and you say, I need to do this, how? And they teach you, they train you. There's a class on tile or lawn sod, or I'm not a carpenter, whatever, and they teach you how to do it, and they give you the materials you need, and then you go back out and do it. And I think that's the heart posture behind a missional church. And then third is we have to take the gospel to the city because the city doesn't want to come to the church. And so I think in a certain context, and maybe your city or your neighborhood is this context, really all your people have to do is be friends with people far from God and then invite them to church, and you can preach the gospel to them. Now, there's a discipleship issue there where your people don't grow like they need to grow, but there's not really an evangelism like that works, or it worked a long time ago, or it works, and depending on your context. In my context, that doesn't do anything because people don't want to come to church. They don't care if I have a $5 million play structure like arcade for their kids. Like they just think we're a cult, so they don't care. They're not interested in coming to church. So if my neighbor Ken is ever going to hear the gospel, it's not going to be through me on stage. It's going to be over a beer or in a park or at soccer practice because we're coaching our kids' soccer team right now. It's going to be on a walk on a Saturday afternoon. It's going to be over at our home for dinner. Like, it's going to be in life. If he's ever going to hear the gospel, it's not going to come through a sermon. It's going to come through a conversation. And that is true of most of our city. The kind of giant evangelism-based megachurch thing, that works great. Alan Hirsch was helpful for me this. That works great for a segment of the population. Depending on your context, maybe that segment is 10%, maybe you're in Dallas, Texas, and it's 75%, whatever. In my city, it's maybe 10% at best that it works really well for. But what about the other 90%? Those people need the gospel, and that has to come through your people, which basically just means that the church has to be the church again and not just go to church on Sundays. So that was a huge shift for us, from attractional to missional, and I'm running out of time here. So secondly, from house churches to missional communities. So we had a house church model, which didn't really work that well. So a lot of churches have a small group model. So for us, that shift was huge, and I just want to say it again, a small group and a missional community are not the same thing. It's not a value judgment, better or worse, they're just not the same thing. And so if I hear another person be like, oh, we have missional communities like our life groups, like, no, that's not the same thing. It's a great thing, it's not the same thing. So the point of a small group is a small group, and the point of a missional community is something else. It's a group of people that come together around gospel or justice or foster care or neighborhood or hospitality, whatever the thing is, to deliberately participate in the mission of God. So that was a huge shift for us.
Rush through that, Tom.
Yeah.
It's good for you to just explain that a little bit more. We're fine time-wise.
Are you sure?
Yeah. This is too important
Yeah.
to just rush by.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah,
A
so...
couple of examples. I know what you guys are doing, but people are...
Yeah, well, I just think in a small group model, the goal, it's not a bad goal, is to come together and have relationships together and, grow as you follow Jesus. And that's great. But I think in a missional community model, the goal is to come together around a mission, which is broad and generic, and then to do the other two pieces, which are we would call family and discipleship. So family, relationships, community, discipleship, spiritual formation, to become more like Jesus. To do those two things en route, or in the Genesis 12 framework, to be a family that is a blessing kind of family, that sees its existence as outward and, self-sacrificial. So that was, oh my gosh, such a hard shift for me to make, for our church to make, and all of that. So secondly, from house churches to missional communities. Third, we had to make the shift from a church with communities to a church of communities. Maybe that's language you're familiar with. I think for us before, because everything was event-based and Sunday-based, it was like, hey, if you want to connect, join a community or whatever. And now what it's become is our church is essentially, we say this all the time, Welcome to Sunday. You are basically at a gathering that is a network of missional communities. And some of you aren't in one, and you're welcome here, but we are a network of missional communities spread out across the urban core of our city that all come together as kind of like, think of a missional community as a family, and this is like a tribe, you know? So we come together to worship Jesus and for the other things that we do in a gathering. And then finally, we made the shift from a multi-site church to a family of churches, is language that we have used for a while now. We did the multi-church thing, or multi-congregational church thing for a while, and I actually am a huge fan of that. I did not work well for us for a couple of different reasons I don't have time to get into, but I'm a fan of that model, of the multi-church as opposed to multi-site model, if you're familiar with that conversation. John Tyson, the guys in Trinity Grace, are killing it at that. So we're huge fans of that, and we gave it a good go, but you learn by doing. It did not work great for us. So now we've kind of evolved into more of essentially a mini church planning network, or almost like a micro-denomination, where our churches are all autonomous, but we have some shared resourcing that just saves a ton of money and a ton of time and effort, and is just super, super helpful, as well as church planning and justice stuff that we do together. So honestly, we set out to make those 4 changes, and I wish I could say, like, the last 5 years have been amazing. They have been the hardest of my life. Like, holy cow, it's been just brutal, discouraging at times, exhausting. I basically almost had a nervous breakdown about 1.5 years ago. And a lot of people were really into it. Like, finally, we get to actually be the church and not just come listen to you teach every Sunday. But a lot of people were not. Like, it turns out, I'm an idealist, right? And that doesn't last long. I'm 35 and it's just about dead, you know? But it turns out a lot of people like the status quo. A lot of people like the attractional church, like put church and God in your little box and go 3 or 4 Sundays out of the month, and you have your thing, give a little money, and then do your American life. Turns out a lot of good people, a lot of people that have been following Jesus for a very long time really like the status quo and really don't want you to disturb that. And so a lot of people, you know, our growth did this, and then we did all this awesome like stuff that I so believe in. Our growth went like this, you know. And our church is healthier than it's ever been. Our churches now are healthier than they've ever been before. But it was a huge change for us. And, you know, the hardest part for me was how hard it was for a lot of the leaders, in particular a lot of the paid staff. Turns out that pastors have a vested interest in the status quo. We had a great crew of pastors. But as a pastor, so much of your identity is wrapped up in your form of church. And this is why I just think humility is non-negotiable. Like, we have to be more than willing to say we were wrong. And what we did was wrong. And our heart maybe was good, maybe it wasn't, but our heart was good. And we want to learn from that. It's one of the things I love about, you know, you look at some older pastors, and there's the Tim Kellers of the world that you're just like, I'm not even reformed, and I still think you walk on water. Like, can I be that smart when I'm your age, you know, and faithful and rooted and humble and cultured, and just you quote, you know, Beowulf in your sermons? I'm like, come on, you know? Who does that? I quote like Arcade Fire, you know? So, and then there's, you know, but how many pastors are upwards of 70 or whatever Keller is and have that kind of winsome intelligence and humility? Not a lot. I know a lot that are just fundamentalist, dogmatic, arrogant. It's one of the things I love about Chris, you know, and I just think we have to have the humility to say, you know what, I did church this way for X number of years, but it's not my identity. That's not who I am. And I'm learning, and I am learning in process, and you know, we value change and incremental growth because we also think that's another way of saying maturity. And we're not there yet. We don't have it down. And so I just think that's so important. And so honestly, when it comes to the mission conversation now, 5 years in, I feel like this is probably a bummer, but I feel like I have more questions than answers. Like all the missional stuff. I remember when the first time I read Shaping of Things to Come by Alan Hirsch and Michael Frost. I don't know if you've read that. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm quitting my mega church tomorrow. Like, this is amazing. But those guys, as fantastic as they are, and they're sweet, sweet guys, they've never done any of the stuff they're talking about. Seriously, they haven't. And they'll tell you they haven't. I did some research. They haven't. So their critique of the attractional, Sunday-centric American megachurch is brilliant. You should all read it and agree with it. They don't have an option C. So, other than speak at conferences a lot about how to change your church. But that's why most of those books are at theory level. And it's really good theory. And you ask, so what does this actually look like? What are you actually doing? And there's a vague, elusive answer. Like, the answer is nothing. And it's really good theory. Like, their critique is fantastic. Their theory is awesome. But they aren't actually doing it. That's our job. And so we are the ones, we have to figure out like how to do this, how to change the church. And it will not be hard, it will not be easy, it will be hard. You know, the analogy that's helpful for me, my family, we've done a couple of remodels on some old houses. And I'm not a carpenter, but I love like design, and I love that process of change from an old house that's made new and beautiful. There are two kinds of, and I'll finish here, there are two kinds of remodels. One is a cosmetic remodel, where they're the best kind. Basically, all you have to do is like paint everything, put in new carpet, or tear up the old carpet in this wood floor, and you sand it down, and tear out the old ugly rhododendron or whatever in the front. You don't have those down here. They're just this hideous organ plant that's all over. You tear out the ugly shrub in the front and put in a nice, thing if it's in the suburbs or whatever, and you retile, and it's just, it's cosmetic. And that's the best because it doesn't take a lot of money, it doesn't take a lot of time, it doesn't take a lot of effort, and your house just looks massively different when you're done. You make all sorts of money and equity. It's beautiful. The other kind of remodel is a structural remodel, where like the house is just, it's about to fall over. And so it's really old. I live in an old house right now, and it needs that. Like, it's sagging on and down in the middle. The doors have all been cut crooked because the floors are so. It's like this horror, freaky basement. It's just really scary house. So it's falling off the side of this hill. So to fix this house would mean like up, off. If you've ever seen an old house, Portland has a lot of them. We live right in the urban cores, all these really old houses. That has to actually get lifted off the foundation. They have to rebuild the foundation, set it back down, redo the framing, new windows. And these kind of remodels are expensive and hard and time-consuming. So I think, point of the analogy, I think what we've done in the American church, all of the emergent church conversation from a decade ago, the last couple of decades have been a cosmetic remodel on the church. Like, it's basically been mopping up after Jerry Falwell and friends and trying to look, we need to clean up. And so it's been like, let's have cool music. Let's turn the lights down in church. All sorts of people will get saved now as a result. Let's have a pastor with a tattoo. And off stage, he'll cuss a little, not on stage, but off stage, Let's have a little liturgy once in a while to show we're smart. Let's, and it's all this great stuff. It's all great stuff. 10 years ago, people thought I was the most innovative person because we had a rock band, candles, and t-shirts. It was like, oh my gosh, this is the future of the church. So that's great. That's cosmetic remodel. It's so fun. It's so easy. You wear some skinny jeans. You don't have a 3-point sermon. You teach us narrative. You have a tattoo. You do a little justice project for here, and you quote from a movie once in a while. Boom. And you're relevant or whatever. And that's fine. That's not a bad thing. That had to happen. That's great. You have to do that stuff. It's great. We have to constantly do that. We'll have to do it again in 5 years, and again in 5 years, and again in 5 years, and again in 5 years. But I think what the church in the West at least needs is a structural remodel. Things actually have to change way deeper than fashion or tone or style or music or architecture. We have to actually change how we do church. And so that means the call right now, I think, is for pioneers, not settlers. Pioneers are the first. I live at the end of the Oregon Trail. Portland's the end of the Oregon Trail. Lewis and Clark, So pioneers, they go out and they're, I would imagine, rough and maybe uneducated, and they don't have it all down. They blaze a trail, and they start something from scratch. And it's not sophisticated, it's not cultured, it's not dialed in. And then settlers come behind and turn that little, settlement into a city that has a street and a government and a thing and a mayor and, people that don't have beards 3 feet long and all of that. And so I think the call right now is for pioneers to explore and discover a new way of being and doing church in our Western context. And so for me, I frankly feel like I have more questions than answers. I don't feel like Bridgetown right now is a model of how you should do church. I don't know that we'll ever get to the spot in my lifetime, or at least under my lead pastor tenure, where we'll have a model dialed in. We're this is a missional, charismatic, urban future church. I don't know that we'll get there, but I want to set the stage for my sons to get there and my grandkids to get there. And so they can say, Dad, he was a little unsophisticated, but you know what? He blazed a trail. And we're here and not back in St. Louis because he had the courage to go. And so it takes courage, it takes sacrifice. Your church will not grow as fast, people will not like you as much, you will not have as many Twitter followers. But I really believe the call right now is for pioneers. So that's just my challenge to you. It's really just my challenge to me. Like, if you're doing the status quo in your church, that's fine. Like, we need more good status quo churches. But we need future churches. We can't just manage decline. And so I love this room because this is not a room that idolizes numbers and growth. This is a room that really wants to be the people of Jesus in your place. And so it's an honor to be here with you, and may God lead you and give you the courage to do what's next. So.